You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's see the top stories. Middle East attacks intensify as Donald Trump says he rejects Iran's attempt to talk. Donald Trump and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz discuss Iran, tariffs and Ukraine. And Australia and Canada have signed a new agreement aimed at boosting cross-border investment. Fighting between Washington and Tehran is widening, with fresh strikes reported across the region in the past 12 hours. Both sides say they are acting in self-defense as the death toll rises and global markets react.
Israel has launched a wave of strikes inside Iran, targeting missile sites, defense systems, and military infrastructure. Iranian media report fresh explosions in Tehran, while the Iranian Red Crescent says at least 787 people have died since the fighting began, including up to 168 at a girls' school in Manab. Iran has retaliated for a fourth night, firing missiles near the U.S. Embassy in Dubai and at a port in Fujairah. The Revolutionary Guard says it also struck a U.S. base in Bahrain. Saudi Arabia intercepted 2 cruise missiles over Al-Kharj.
Over the past year and a half, we have heard a great deal of deceptive information, but now it is time to fight and defend our country, and anything that attempts to distract us or lead us astray will be rejected. Deception has always been part of our enemy's modus operandi. Our armed forces have sworn an oath, and the Iranian people have pledged to give their all to win this war.
U.S. President Donald Trump said American forces joined Israel's assault to prevent a first strike by Tehran.
Based on the way the negotiation was going, I think they were going to attack first, and I didn't want that to happen. So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand, but Israel was ready and we were ready, and we've had a very, very powerful impact because virtually everything they have has been knocked out now. Their missile count is going way down.
The Pentagon confirmed 4 American soldiers were killed in a drone attack in Kuwait on March 1st. A young girl also died from shrapnel injuries, and at least 3 others have been killed since the fighting began. In Lebanon, an Israeli air raid hit a residential complex in Baalbek, killing at least 4 and wounding 6. Thousands have been displaced. In western Iraq, an airstrike targeted a site used by pro-Iranian armed groups. The escalating conflict across Iran, the Gulf, and neighboring regions is disrupting global trade and sending energy markets sharply higher.
The Middle East is entering a more dangerous phase as Israel is exchanging strikes with Iran and Hezbollah. With fighting spreading across borders and threats looming over key oil routes, the conflict is widening both militarily and economically. Our correspondent Maria Rodriguez-Abalde reports from Tel Aviv.
Israel remains under attack. The missile launches are now concentrated in the morning and also during the night. But since Hezbollah has joined in support of Iran, the situation has become more complicated as the missiles coming from Lebanon arrive much faster and the advance warning alerts sent to civilians' phones do not come through. As a result, when the sirens sound, there is very little time to find a shelter. It's been 5 days of this epic fury operation, and it's evident the society is exhausted. The operation in Lebanon has only just begun, with thousands displaced in Beirut and a tense situation on the border where Israeli troops have engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Tehran is responding with a campaign targeting USA bases and embassies in various Middle Eastern countries, as well as oil refineries and tourist infrastructure such as airports and hotels. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or Dubai were some of them. Israel claims to have bombed the meeting of of the 88-member council in Iran to choose Khamenei's successor. Several sources say the CIA is working to arm Kurdish forces in an attempt to incite a popular uprising in Iran. The Revolutionary Guards claim to have full control of the Strait of Hormuz, while the USA say it will be able to escort ships passing through it. It is the other phase of the war, the economic one. About 20% of the world's oil production pass through this corridor, so markets are already trembling.
The U.S. State Department has urged American citizens to leave immediately from more than a dozen countries across the Middle East amid escalating tensions in Iran. Officials cited serious safety risks in nations including Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, the UAE and Yemen. Authorities advised Americans needing assistance with commercial travel arrangements should contact the State Department. The United States has carried out a submarine torpedo strike that snagged an Iranian warship off the south coast of Sri Lanka, according to the U.S. Secretary of Defense. Pete Hegseth confirmed that the U.S. was behind the deadly strike on an Iranian frigate that was traveling close to the Sri Lankan coast. Sri Lankan forces are searching for more than 100 sailors after the Iranian Navy frigate Iris Dana sank off the southern coast near Galle. At least 30 crew members were rescued, with 32 injured sailors taken to Karapitiya Hospital in Galle. Search operations by Sri Lanka's Navy and Air Force are continuing. In Washington, President Donald Trump received German Chancellor Friedrich Merz at the White House. Discussions focused on the escalating situation in Iran, Ukraine preserving its territory, and global tariffs.
US President Donald Trump hosted German Chancellor Friedrich Merz at the White House on Tuesday, thanking Berlin for its support amid the widening confrontation involving Iran. During an exchange with reporters, Trump claimed that most potential alternatives to Iran's supreme leader had already been killed.
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group, they may be dead also, based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody.
Chancellor Merz said Berlin and Washington are on the same page when it comes to ending what he described as Iran's terrible terrorist regime.
We are supporting the United States and Israel to get rid of this terrible terrorist regime, and we are looking forward to a day after, and we have to talk about the strategy, what is following after this regime is away, and we have to strategize on this entire region.
Merz also urged the US to increase pressure on Russian President Putin over the Ukraine war, stressing that any lasting peace deal must have Europe's support. Trade was another key topic, with Berlin expecting future US tariffs on EU imports to stay within the 2025 trade deal limits. The meeting underscored the close, though sometimes cautious, alignment between Washington and Berlin on geopolitical and economic issues.
Washington and Beijing are preparing for another round of high-level trade discussions later this month as both sides seek to manage ongoing economic tensions.
Senior trade officials from China and the United States are set to meet in mid-March ahead of a planned summit between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping later this month. The meeting indicates renewed efforts to stabilize economic ties amid persistent frictions. Both sides are expected to discuss tariffs, export controls, market access, and broader strategic concerns that continue to weigh on bilateral relations. Last year saw multiple rounds of trade engagements aimed at preventing further escalation. Officials from both countries held talks in London, Stockholm, Geneva, and Kuala Lumpur in 2025, describing discussions as constructive while seeking limited tariff relief and confidence-building measures. Although no comprehensive breakthrough was achieved, the dialogue helped prevent a sharp deterioration in ties and preserved channels of communication following renewed tariff actions early in Trump's current term. The upcoming mid-March talks are expected to involve U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, who oversees economic and trade affairs. The meeting comes during an ongoing tariff standoff, technology restriction, and strategic rivalry, with both governments balancing domestic economic pressures against the need for stability. Manu Mathum, A-News, Beijing.
U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to cut off trade with Spain, accusing it of being uncooperative over NATO spending and access to military bases. His remarks came after Spain said it would not allow U.S. forces to use jointly operated bases for strikes on Iran, not covered by the UN Charter.
Some of the European, like Spain, has been terrible. In fact, I told Scott to cut off all dealings with Spain. Spain, first of all, it started when every European nation, at my request, paid 5%, which they should be doing. And everybody was enthusiastic about it, Germany, everybody. And Spain didn't do it. And now Spain actually said that we can't use their bases, and that's all right. We could use their base if we want. We could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it, but we don't have to. But they were unfriendly.
The UK government is tightening visa rules, introducing what it calls an emergency brake to curb asylum claims. The decision comes as Prime Minister Keir Starmer faces growing pressure to show tougher control of the immigration system. Zainab Farizadeh has more.
Britain has announced it will block study visas for nationals from Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar and Sudan, and hold work visas for Afghans in what it calls an emergency brake to curb rising asylum claims. The government says the move is designed to address what it describes as growing abuse of legal migration routes. According to the Home Office, asylum applications by students from the 4 countries have increased more than 5-fold between 2021 and 2025. It also says asylum claims by Afghans who arrived on work visas are now outstripping the number of visas issued. Interior Minister Shabana Mahmood says Britain will always provide refuge to people fleeing war and persecution, but adds that the visa system must not be abused. She calls a decision to refuse visas for certain nationals unprecedented, arguing it is necessary to protect the integrity of the immigration system. Immigration remains one of the most politically sensitive issues in the UK, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government under pressure to demonstrate tighter control as the Reform UK party gains ground in opinion polls. Government figures show that asylum claims made by people who initially entered on legal visas have more than trebled since 2021, accounting for 39% of roughly 100,000 applications last year. Ministers say nearly 16,000 nationals from the 4 listed countries are currently being supported at public expense, including more than 6,000 housed in hotels. The annual cost of asylum accommodation is estimated at £4 billion. At the same time, the government says Britain has granted sanctuary to more than 37,000 Afghans through resettlement schemes since 2021 and issued about 190,000 humanitarian visas last year. Starmer has previously argued that Britain's asylum rules are more permissive than those in parts of Europe and have acted as a pull factor for people seeking to reach the country. In November, the government set out plans to make refugee status temporary and to speed up the removal of people who arrive illegally. The changes are due to take effect on 26 March. The government says it intends to introduce capped, safe and legal rules in the future once the asylum system has stabilized. Zainab Farizadeh, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Canada and Australia have signed a new agreement aimed at boosting cross-border investment. The deal was launched during Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to Sydney, part of a broader push to strengthen ties between the 2 countries.
Canada and Australia have launched a new initiative to increase investment between their largest pension funds, marking the first formal agreement of its kind between the 2 countries. The deal was unveiled during Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's official visit to Australia. It is designed to encourage pension funds from both sides to invest more in each other's economies and to work with governments to remove policy barriers limiting long-term capital flows. Speaking in Sydney, Carney also called for de-escalation in the Middle East, urging all parties to respect international rules of engagement.
Canada reaffirms that international law binds all belligerents. We condemn the strikes carried out by Iran on civilians and civilian infrastructure across the Middle East. And we implore all parties, including the United States and Israel, to respect the rules of international engagement. Canada calls for a rapid de-escalation of hostilities and is prepared to assist in achieving this goal. Resolution of this crisis will require commitment to a broader political solution. And diplomatic engagement is essential to avoid a wider and deeper conflict.
The visit comes as Carney promotes closer cooperation among so-called middle powers amid growing global uncertainty. He is on a multi-leg trip across the Asia-Pacific region, also visiting Japan and India, where he has signed trade agreements and sought to reset relations with New Delhi.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss President Emmanuel Macron's push to extend France's nuclear deterrence across Europe and what it means for Europe's future security architecture. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Against the backdrop of intensifying security tensions across Europe and ongoing wars on the continent's periphery, Emmanuel Macron has unveiled a major update to France's nuclear doctrine. For the first time, Paris is moving decisively to extend its nuclear deterrence role across Europe, inviting allies into joint exercises, deploying strategic forces beyond France's borders, and expanding its nuclear stockpile, all while insisting this is not an arms race. The announcement comes as Europe reassesses its security architecture amid Russia's war in Ukraine, uncertainty over long-term U.S. commitments, and rising instability in the Middle East, raising a fundamental question. Is Europe edging toward a more autonomous nuclear deterrence framework? To break down the strategic, political and security implications of France's new nuclear posture, I'm joined by political analyst Nuno Martins, speaking to us from Brussels, Belgium. Mr. Martins, thank you for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Martins, what fundamentally changes with France's updated nuclear doctrine compared to Macron's 2020 vision?
First and foremost, this nuclear doctrine is not new. Secondly, it was tried to be implemented by General de Gaulle and then later re-evaluated both in the 70s and in the 90s. And even President Sarkozy also mentioned that, if I'm not mistaken, around 2008 after his election. The question is very simple. What we have to see today is that France is the only nuclear power. France has a vision to support and defend Europe. President Macron has to come with some initiatives if he wants to re-envisage to, as you know, he's leaving office in around 12 to 17 months. I don't know exactly now how many months it will still last his presidency. But the question is, he needs to also find a solution for his future. And the doctrine is basically not only to support France, but to support European member states, the European Union as a whole, or at least those countries within the European Union who are willing to be protected by the France nuclear deterrence. And this goes against the threats that Europe can face, and the threat today comes from Iran, but there is a permanent threat from Russia as well. And maybe this is also done because the guarantee of American security to Europe is no longer taking place, despite the fact that this is, I think, what people have been saying. If people think, I disagree with that, and I can explain why.
So, Mr. Martins, but how does France's move differ from existing NATO nuclear sharing arrangements led by the United States?
So that's the thing. The question is exactly that. It's America. The fact that America is basically trying to have a smaller role or giving more responsibility to Europe to face its own security forces and own security shield. It doesn't mean that the American is not securing Europe or doesn't see Europe as an ally. It means that Europe has to give more. And in that sense, in my view, that's exactly what President Macron is trying to do, even though we don't know if he knows it or not. That's not the point, because in his mind, he's only trying to get the glory of France and trying to see France as the first nuclear power or the sole nuclear power in Europe to be the safeguard for the whole European. But it doesn't mean that having a safer Europe, having Europe had placed deterrents in the same vein as the Americans do, it doesn't mean there is a shift or a separation between the US and Europe. It means that Europe has grown up. It's not necessarily bad that Europe has its own way of securing and saving its own European Union member states. It is, in fact, the fact that Europe has thought that there will be peace forever in the words of Immanuel Kant that led us to this situation, which every single conflict in the world can create a problem to the European security, to the European economy, to the European, life, which means that the idea that Europe is an example for the rest of the world, funny enough, we now discover that, as President Macron said, we need to be fearless. We need to look that we are strong and to show fear to other people if we want to be serious. And therefore, this is why he's implementing this security defense.
Germany's participation is particularly striking. How politically sensitive is nuclear cooperation in Berlin?
So that's exactly another point which is very interesting. The first point is that, as you know, the civil program of nuclear energy in Germany was quite strong until there was a political will, especially by some left-wing groups, the Green groups, and also, as some people say, paid by the Russian disinformation in order to get rid of nuclear civil ways and in order to have Germany buying more Russian gas. On the other hand, as you also know, after the Second World War, it was always the idea that Germany should be more or less demilitarized, not to engage in other wars as it did in the past, in the First World War and the Second World War. So it is interesting to see how Germany is entering this. It's interesting that there is a shift in the German energetical and military policy in the future. And the question is, in my view, this will eventually and clearly strengthen the European Union as a whole and the even a certain European federalization. I always said that the new perspective regarding defense by the European countries can only enforce European federalization through a way that is quite, let's say, acceptable by those who criticize the European federalization. And I do believe that this type of attitude can do strongly base that view, even if that will find some obstacles from some left-wing parties, especially the Green Party.
Mr. Martins, could this initiative be seen by Moscow as escalatory, despite Macron's claims that France is not entering an arms race?
Any deterrence is made by strengths and by capabilities. Of course, this can be seen by Russia as a threat, but it's also true that it's for Russia to decide what they can see as a threat or not. What is not possible is that Russia will tell the Europeans, please don't do that, because then I consider it as a threat. The Europeans have to be prepared that who decides how they defend themselves, at least, and how they use deterrence as a way to defend themselves are the Europeans, not anyone else in that sense. Unless you are doing something for the Europeans that you want something as a bargain, which is the case of the Americans. But if you stop doing that, then you leave the job for the Europeans to choose themselves how to proceed in the future on playing security and defense. And in that sense, even if the Russians see it as a threat, I don't believe it's a threat, at least for now, because as President Macron said, this is going to be used in a defensive way, meaning whatever it means, that it's not going to be used to attack someone else, but it's going to be used to defend Europe for any attack from any challenge that Europe will have in the future wars, meaning with Russia, meaning with Iran, with Iranian proxies, whatever. So that's the thing. I think whatever Russia thinks it will be, it's for the Europeans to decide what they want to do.
Just briefly, does this doctrine make Europe safer, or does it risk deepening divisions within the EU and NATO?
That's a very good question, and it's a very difficult question to answer because there is no straight answer for that. First, we don't know. The doctrine should increase the defense capabilities if there is really cooperation and interaction in how to use this, on one hand. We will see how France will play the role of the only European nuclear power. Within the European, I don't see anyone who could be against this, because the question is, this is for defense, this is not for attack. And I don't think that if a member state using this will see itself putting on a certain position that can be attacked by someone outside, let's say Cyprus, let's say Estonia, let's say Poland, let's say Romania, I don't believe that any of these countries will be having any problem in having nuclear capabilities as long as it is for deterrence. However, saying this, the only problem that we are not discussing is if Cyprus uses this, despite the fact that Cyprus was not one of the countries who accepted it, if I'm not mistaken, then this will create a longer problem between Turkey and the European Union. But at this moment, I believe that this will create strengths. It creates already certain countries to accept it immediately without reserve. And this is good to know and to see. I think that's a way that especially border countries with Russia are willing to put on their own member states, and they have been asking for this for long now.
Nuno Martins, thank you very much for your insights and for helping us unpack the strategic consequences of this major shift in Europe's security landscape. We appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Now, let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Georgia is reinforcing its regional diplomacy with visible intensity. In Tbilisi, the prime ministers of Georgia and Armenia co-chaired the 15th session of the Intergovernmental Commission on Economic Cooperation, sending coordinated messages on trade, expansion, regional peace and European engagement. Our correspondent in Tbilisi has more.
The 15th session of the Georgia-Armenia Intergovernmental Commission on Economic Cooperation was held in Tbilisi under the joint leadership of Irakli Qobakhidze and Nikol Pashinyan. Both leaders emphasized the strategic partnership between their countries and confirmed that political dialogue remains active at the highest level. According to the Georgian side, Armenia is among Georgia's top 10 trading partners and ranks in the top 3 in terms of visitor numbers. Tourism flows in both directions are increasing, reflecting what both leaders described as strong people-to-people ties. Prime Minister Qobakhidze stressed that despite an already high level of cooperation, there is clear potential for further expansion in trade, transport, education, culture and sports. He also underlined Georgia's commitment to promoting peace and stability in the South Caucasus, stating that Tbilisi will spare no effort to support regional stability. In a clear political message, Pashinyan reaffirmed Armenia's support for Georgia's sovereignty, territorial integrity and political independence. A central theme of the meeting was the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process. Qobakhidze welcomed the August agreement signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan, calling it a historic step that creates a solid foundation for long-term regional stability. Pashinyan thanked Georgia for consistently supporting dialogue and facilitating trilateral economic contacts. European integration was also part of the agenda. Pashinyan noted that Georgia is an important partner for Armenia in the context of Armenia-EU relations and confirmed ongoing discussions on cooperation with the European Union. Both sides acknowledged shared regional interests linked to European engagement. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Turkey says it's stepping up diplomatic efforts to ease tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan after several days of deadly border clashes. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has spoken with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif as fighting between the two countries continues. Our correspondent Tamim Bahiz reports from Kabul.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has held a telephone conversation with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif to discuss the escalating conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan. In a statement, a Turkish Directorate of Communications said Erdogan told Sharif that Ankara is working to help reinforce the ceasefire between the two countries, a ceasefire that had previously been established through Turkey's diplomatic initiative. The Turkish president also expressed a readiness to support further efforts aimed at maintaining calm and preventing the situation from escalating further between the neighboring states. The call comes as clashes between Afghan and Pakistani forces continue for a sixth consecutive day. The latest escalation began after Pakistan carried out airstrikes inside Afghanistan, saying it was targeting militants from the TTP group. Afghanistan condemned those strikes as a violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And soon after, Afghanistan Defense Forces launched what they described as retaliatory attacks on Pakistani security outposts along the border. According to the UN, the fighting has already left more than 160 people dead or injured and forced thousands of civilians to flee their homes. With tensions still high, diplomatic efforts are now focused on reinforcing the ceasefire and preventing the conflict from widening further. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A-News.
Turkey said a NATO air defense system intercepted an Iranian missile headed toward its airspace. Ankara stated that debris from the interceptor missile landed in Hatay province in the country's southeast. The incident marks the first time a NATO member has been directly affected by the widening conflict involving Iran, the United States and Israel. NATO condemned Iran for targeting Turkey. According to Reuters, a Turkish diplomatic source said Ankara has lodged a protest with Iran over the ballistic missile that was headed toward its airspace. As tensions in the region continue to escalate and regional hostilities disrupt air travel, Azerbaijan has received around 1,200 evacuees crossing from Iran through the Astara checkpoint. Groups include nationals from China, Russia, South Africa and Europe, with some Russian embassy staff among them.
Nearly 1,200 people have crossed into Azerbaijan from Iran since the regional escalation began, reflecting a sustained rise in evacuation traffic through the Astara state border checkpoint. The latest movements included a group of 50 evacuees, citizens of China, Russia, South Africa, Georgia, the Philippines and Italy. 2 of the Russian nationals in that group were embassy staff members. A subsequent wave included Chinese nationals as well as citizens of Oman, Nigeria, Japan, Belarus and Kazakhstan, further adding to the steady flow of foreign nationals being processed at the crossing.
Yesterday, we from Tehran and come to Azerbaijan side gate. We are now back we are going back to China, going back to home. And thank our embassy in Iran and embassy in Azerbaijan, they help us a lot.
After completing border and security procedures, evacuees were transported by bus toward Baku, while Russian nationals were redirected to Lankaran International Airport for onward repatriation flights arranged by their authorities. The evacuation effort follows heightened hostilities involving the United States and Israel, which have sharply limited regional air travel and increased reliance on land corridors. Cross-border processing remains active, with these southern corridor continuing to serve as a critical exit point from Iran. Gülçin Hocalayeva, Nijat Kasımov, A-News.
And 14 crew members of an Iranian airline, including pilots and flight attendants, have been safely repatriated to Iran through the Astara border crossing on Wednesday. The airline's aircraft remained in Almaty after the crew was unable to return on board. The crew traveled to Baku and then crossed into Iran via Astara, marking the first evacuation in the reverse direction from Azerbaijan to Iran in the past 5 days. Authorities ensured that all necessary arrangements were in place for a safe and orderly crossing. Central Asian countries are expanding evacuation options for their citizens amid the escalating conflict in the Middle East. Turkmenistan has opened additional border crossings with Iran, while Kyrgyzstan is arranging evacuation routes and flights to bring its nationals home.
Central Asian countries are taking additional measures to help their citizens leave the Middle East as tensions in the region continue to escalate. Kyrgyzstan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says its citizens can now exit Iran through Turkmenistan using several border checkpoints. The Ertuk and Sarvas crossings are open to holders of civilian passports, while the Bajkiran crossing is reserved for diplomatic passport holders. Authorities have urged citizens to contact the Kyrgyz embassy in Turkmenistan or the Foreign Ministry for assistance. Additionally, Kyrgyzstan is preparing to receive a flight from Oman carrying 180 passengers, scheduled to arrive on March 5th. Authorities estimate that about 22,000 Kyrgyz citizens are currently in the Middle East, mostly in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, though no casualties have been reported so far. At the same time, Turkmenistan has expanded evacuation routes by reopening several checkpoints along its border with Iran, including Saras, Artik Luftabad, Gaudan Bajkiran, Akiela in Tiburun, and the Altin Asir in Tiburun. The measures allow foreign nationals to leave Iran by land as air travel in the region remains disrupted. Regional flights have also been affected. Turkmenistan Airlines has temporarily suspended services between Ashgabat and Dubai, as well as Ashgabat and Jeddah due to airspace restrictions linked to the crisis. Authorities across the region say the evacuation routes and special flights are aimed at ensuring the safe return of citizens as the security situation remains uncertain. It is Sivid Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Tensions around the Strait of Hormuz are raising concerns far beyond the energy market. Analysts warn that disruptions along this key maritime corridor could also affect agricultural supply chains and grain trade in Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, shipments of grain to Iran have already stalled as uncertainty grows across regional shipping routes. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
Restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz could impact Kazakhstan's agricultural sector. Economists warn that disruptions along this key maritime route may push fertilizer prices higher and increase production costs for farmers. For a country where grain is one of the main export commodities, such changes can directly affect the cost of production and the income of agricultural producers. At the same time, regional tensions are already affecting trade flows. Shipments of Kazakh grain to Iran have effectively been frozen for an indefinite period. Iran remains one of the key markets for Kazakhstan's grain exports. Last season, the country supplied more than 1 million tons there through routes across the Caspian Sea. The disruption is already visible in maritime logistics. According to sources cited by Reuters, Iran has stopped accepting cargo through its main Caspian Sea port, Amirabad. Shipping data from the London Stock Exchange Group shows that there are currently no grain vessels approaching Iranian ports. One vessel from Kazakhstan, the grain carrier Bellatrix, arrived near Amirabad on March 2nd, despite being fully loaded. It has remained anchored offshore without entering the port. Grain shipments between the two countries largely pass through the Amirabad grain terminal Kish, an important hub for trade across the Caspian Sea. Kazakhstan and Iran had previously planned to expand bilateral trade to $3 billion, but according to Kazakhstan's grain union, no new grain supply contracts with Iran are currently being negotiated, while disruptions in the Middle East threaten up to 15% of global grain logistics. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
Azerbaijan is positioning itself for the next phase of regional energy development. At a ministerial gathering in Baku, policymakers and global energy companies detailed expansion plans that could significantly increase renewable capacity over the coming decade. Aytan Shukurova reports.
Rising temperatures, water stress and biodiversity loss in the Caspian Basin have intensified calls for coordinated regional action. Officials at the 4th ministerial meeting of the Green Energy Advisory Council in Baku described renewable energy development not only as an economic investment.
Caspian Sea is actually a mirror of wider global ecosystems. I'm sure that together we can do everything possible to make sure that the level of the Caspian Sea will rise again. Our country is actively investing in renewable energy projects. It aims at becoming a regional hub of green energy. Only 2 months ago, the largest wind energy facility in the South Caucasus was opened in Azerbaijan. The facility will help prevent over 400,000 tons of carbon emissions. This is another step forward by our country towards minimizing air pollution and increasing green energy usage.
European officials say the acceleration of renewables is now central to long-term energy security and competitiveness.
Renewable energy and energy efficiency are no longer complementary policies, they are the central pillars of a modern energy strategy in the European Union. Accelerating the deployment of wind, solar and other clean technologies. In the European Union, to reinforce our energy security, we have stepped up the pace of this green transition. Across the Union, projects in wind and solar have moved from the planning to delivery at unprecedented speed, bringing total installed capacity to roughly 600 gigawatts.
Azerbaijan's Renewable Energy Agency outlined measurable targets for the next phase of expansion.
Stage 1 envisions the construction by 2027 of solar and wind power plants with a combined capacity of up to 2 gigawatts, fully integrated into the national grid. Total projected investments for these projects are approximately $2 billion.
SOCAR Green highlighted efforts to diversify the national energy mix and develop offshore potential.
We're also working with our Chinese partners on 2 pilot offshore wind projects, each 200 megawatts. Azerbaijan has vast offshore wind capacity with a technical capacity of 157 gigawatts and commercial capacity estimated at 38 gigawatts.
International partners say energy transformation and energy security are advancing together.
Karadagh Solar demonstrated that Azerbaijan could attract international capital for renewable energy projects, building local expertise and delivering complex infrastructure at place. Today, the plant contributes to provide reliable, affordable electricity to more than 100,000 homes and operates as a part of Azerbaijan's broader diversified energy mix.
Over the last 2 decades, ACWA became one of the largest private developers, investors, and operators of green projects. Our purpose remains constant: create long-term value for communities and partners, business to human.
Green energy corridors are being positioned as the infrastructure backbone for exporting future renewable capacity. The shift signals a gradual transition from hydrocarbon-driven growth toward diversified renewable generation, grid modernization, and cross-border electricity trade, with defined capacity targets extending into the next decade.
And now to sport news. From the Olympic spotlight in Italy to the misty peaks of the Caucasus. The world's best ski mountaineers are now battling extreme conditions in Azerbaijan. Let's go to Shahdagh, where Nachachek Jahangirli and the A News team are standing by with the latest from the European Championships. Nachachek Jahangirli reporting from the ground has more.
As the Winter Olympics conclude in Italian Alps, all the eyes of winter sport lovers now are locked on Azerbaijan's Shahdagh mountain resort high in the Caucasus. Well, it's freezing here. The temperature is -5 degrees and thick fog covers the entire area. Visibility is extremely limited. You can barely see anything, but the cold doesn't even matter because world's top ski mountaineers gathered here as back-to-back European and World Championship unfolds in a brand new geography for the sport. This is the European round of the International Ski Mountaineering season, also known as SkiMo. Athletes are competing across multiple age categories: seniors, U23, U20 and U18. The championships open today with the sprint event, which is short but intense. One ascent, one descent, lasting around 3 minutes. Over the coming days, we will also see mixed relay, vertical and individual races. There are several clear favorites, many of them freshly returned from Milano Cortina 2026, which wrote a historic page by adding ski mountaineering to the Olympic Games for the very first time. France comes in with a powerful squad of Olympic gold medalists, while Switzerland and Spain also look extremely strong. So what defines victory in ski mountaineering? Athletes climb on skis, then switch to boots to hike steep sections, and in the end again switch to skis for technical descents. The faster the gear change, the better the result. Each skier carries a backpack with essential equipment for those rapid transitions. And finally, Azerbaijan is represented by 5 skiers, all from nearby mountain villages. These peaks are no strangers to them. We already saw them on the track and they all were brilliant, with promising performances. We will be here for the coming days to follow the races. So tune in for more updates. I'm Narchik Jahangirli, here together with Natik Mehmedov and Eves Hacıyev, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll examine the Strait of Hormuz crisis and its widening impact on global trade and food supplies. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Now we turn to mounting global concern over the escalating crisis surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, the critical maritime checkpoint through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil and gas is shipped daily. What began with US-Israeli strikes on Iran and Tehran's retaliatory warnings has all but halted vessel traffic through Hormuz Strait, sending freight rates and insurance costs soaring and stalling supply chains far beyond energy markets. The disruption is now rippling into agricultural trade, with grain shipments from Kazakhstan to Iran stalled and data showing few, if any, vessels approaching Iranian ports on the Caspian Sea. Additionally, analysts warn that disruptions could translate into higher food prices, container bottlenecks and logistical ripples affecting goods from fertilizers to electronics globally. Joining us to unpack these complex dynamics is Dr. Nurbolat Nushanbayev, a scholar at Turan University, speaking to us from Almaty, Kazakhstan. Mr. Nushanbayev, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Mr. Nushanbayev, how would you summarize the current situation in the Strait of Hormuz and its immediate impact on maritime traffic?
So the conflict in Middle East, in Hormuz, is impacting to the wider region, including Central Asia, Kazakhstan, those countries who doesn't share the border, who consider it as a landlocked nation. So to unpack this issue, I would like to mention the role of the logistics. So disruption in logistical markets definitely is rising the prices of goods, for in particular imported goods for Kazakhstan. So therefore, the ongoing tension between Iran and Israel on Hormuz Strait definitely making the situation day by day serious and harder to overcome.
Dr. Nushanbayev, we are seeing data that grain shipments from Central Asia to Iran are stalled. How does a disruption in one corridor like Hormuz affect the routes as far away from like the Caspian Sea? Can you explain the connection between these maritime disruptions and rising food and commodity prices worldwide?
Exactly. Kazakhstan is a nation who produces agricultural products, who exports agricultural products, as well as have limited access to the sea route. So usually the Kazakhstan, we used to send the grain products by the Caspian Sea to Iran, then by Hormuz to the worldwide. But now in the last couple of weeks, we see continuously disruption and changes on the global supply and chain market. Definitely the first thing is it will not only impact when it comes to the import, but export. That was the first thing. The second aspect is the Kazakhstani farmers are getting very hard to get access for long-term fertilizers for their land and farms and many other needed imported products from the global market. So therefore we see now the disruption, but for how long time lasts, it's not clear yet. But the one thing is becoming clear day by day. It's the price issues. So definitely it will impact the crisis in Hormuz. It will rise the price of the agricultural product in internal market as well as in the global external market. So therefore I think Central Asian nations, it's very important to get back the situation into normal, into casual tension in Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, definitely the disruptions is making the imported products higher and higher.
Dr. Nushanbayev, are there viable alternative routes that can meaningfully replace traffic through Hormuz in the short to medium term?
I see. Surely, if there will not be any alternatives, the governments, the leadership, they should find or create alternatives. Otherwise, we have seen over the last decade continuous disruption of the Hormuz, which is related with geopolitical and political issues. So therefore, trade and the daily life of ordinary farmers, it shouldn't be disrupted by the geopolitical or political tension of the politicians. So therefore, now one of the alternative route, I think, it's by the land roads, not from the north to the south, but as well as to look for alternate roads by corridors on the west, from the east, by the land with BRI project, including with under the Chinese initiative, by the land of China. Otherwise, this kind of interruptions makes sense, low level of trust for long, as well as it will create continuous tensions and problems. So therefore, for the long term, strategically, for the countries like Kazakhstan, landlocked countries who doesn't have direct access to the seas, it will be strategically number one priority to look for alternative routes, not limiting with the southern part, as well as opening up to the east, as well as to the west. Because like Kazakhstan, we're already living under issues related to the logistical aspects. Since 2022, we have had logistical disruption regarding the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Now we see last week between Pakistan and Afghanistan. This week we see the issues related to Iran, the closure of the Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz. So therefore, definitely this situation is making a lot of difficulties, bringing difficulties to the landlocked nations. But I think it's a time to look for opportunities from this critical transformational period to find alternative roads, at least for the short term.
Nurbalat Nushanbayev, thank you very much for talking to A News. We appreciate your insight into these crucial developments at the heart of global trade and security. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for me.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates, and thank you for joining us.